Great. So we've learned in the 6th Mishnah of the 9th chapter, we're learning how to release vows. And we learned, it's a principle of Rabbi Akiva, actually, that a vow which is partially annulled or partially released is completely released. In other words, if you release it in part, you release it completely. So, for example, you swear you're not going to drink wine or eat meat, and then the sages point out to you, actually, you're obliged on certain days to drink wine or eat meat. So they release you on Shabbatot and Chagim. You're obliged to drink wine and eat meat. So you're going to be released on those days. But Rabbi Akiva says it's more than that. Once you're released on a few days, you're released for the whole of the vow. And the Mishnah we're going to pick up in Mishnah 8. And we're going to learn other examples of partial release that works completely. So, for example, someone says, Kunam yain she'eni toem, she'ain ra, la me'ain. So he says, Kunam is the wine that I don't taste. I swear I'm not going to drink wine because wine's bad for the insides. So they said to him, okay, amrulo v'halo miyushan yafel ma'ayim. But they said to him, look, mature wine is really good for the insides. So the vow's based on a misconception. He's released in respect of mature wine, but not just mature wine, all wine completely. Hutar bi miyushan, lo vi miyushan bilavad hutar ela b'chol hayan. He gets out because of the mature wine, but he actually gets out of his whole oath. And we're going to play the same trick with onions. He says, Kunam batzal she'eni toem, she'batzal ra lalev. He says, Kunam, the onions that I don't taste because they're bad for the heart. So they say to him, Amrulo v'halo kufri yafeh lalev. They say to him, kufri. Now, actually, I'm not quite sure what kufri are. There's some kind of onions. Safari actually translates them as village onions because the word far means village. So maybe kufri means onions that come from a village. I don't know. The point is that this is a certain kind of onion. And they say, hello, kufri yafelalev, village onions or this kind of onion are good for the heart. Utar bakufri, so he's released in respect of these kind of onions, the village onions, if they are village onions. But it actually works for the whole vow. Look, bakufri bilevad hutar ele b'chol habatzalim. It works not just in respect of village onions, but of all onions. And now we're going to have some case law. Ma'aseh haya. As such a thing happened, v'hitiro Rabbi Meir b'chol habatzalim. Such a case happened, and Rabbi Meir permitted him all onions. Rabbi Meir, by the way, is the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. So we've had this halacha from Rabbi Akiva, but clearly, or it would seem to be, because Rabbi Meir is quoted here in the case law, maybe we're learning that he learned it from Rabbi Meir. Let's keep going. Let's keep going, because we've learned, for example, that we can, if you go to a sage, he'll release your vow because of, for example, the ketubah, and they talk about releasing it because of the honor of the parents, although only in matters that relate to the parents. But now we're going to go to the heart of the matter. We're going to go to the heart. They open, that is, they release a vow via his own honor and the honor of his children. So now we're really going to get to the heart of his identity in the attempt to release this vow. Because in general, as we've said often, the rabbis don't like vows. They're always searching for a way to release. So this is what they say to him. Ve'omrimlo. This must be to someone, by the way, who's vowed to divorce his wife. Must be. Because they say to him, Ilu ha'ita yodea shel macha yuomrim alecha kach vasto shel ploni ish liot megareshet nashav. Had you known that tomorrow they're going to say of you, it is the habit of this person to divorce his wives. But not grushahen. And about your daughters, they're going to say they're the daughters of a divorced woman. Who wants to marry the daughters of a divorced woman? Because they might, if it runs in a family, they'll be divorced too. And then people are going to say, Ma ra'ati man she la'elu lihit garesh. What fault did he find in their mother to divorce her? It's an extraordinary speech. And he's embarrassed. Amar, he said, Ilu hayiti yodesh hu ken lo hayiti noder. Had I known that is so, I would not have vowed. And that expression of regret, because of his regret for his own honor and the honor of his children, that is enough to release him from the vow. Lo hayiti noder, hare ze mutar. He is released. Let's carry on. Let's do some more releasing. We learned, actually in the third chapter, we can go back to it. In the third chapter, we learned that if you made a vow in error, it does not require release from a sage at all. It's just not a vow. So someone swears, my wife can't have any benefit from me because she stole my purse and beat my child. And then later it turns out that she didn't steal his purse and she didn't beat his child. So the vow is completely null and void. It doesn't require a sage to release it. So let's look at this Mishnah. He swears, Kunam sheni noseli flonit k'ura. Kunam, if I marry that ugly woman, v'harehi nava, and she turns out to be beautiful. Shchora, black, v'harehi levana. And she black, and she turns out to be white. Sarah, short. Very interesting. They seem to have the same prejudices that some of us have today. It's Sarah, short. I know some women who never marry a short boy. Sarah, v'harehi aruka, short, and she's tall. Turns out she's tall. V'harei lo mipnei shehi kura. ונעשה לבה, שחורה ונעשה לבנה, קצרה ונעשית ארוכה, אלה שהנדר טעות. He's permitted to marry her, not because she was ugly and became beautiful, or black and became white, or short and grew tall, but because the vow was made in error. Ela shehaneder ta'ut. A vow made in error is not a vow at all. Now, we're going to close. This is the closing Mishnah of the chapter of annulment of vows. Really interesting Mishnah. We're going to close with a story where the vow was not made in error, but in fact, the woman did become beautiful. So he did require a release from his vow. It happened with someone who vowed not to benefit from his sister's daughter, i.e. his niece. And remember, there was a custom of marrying someone's niece, and perhaps this was economically important for the family. So he vowed not to marry her. So she was taken into Rabbi Ishmael's house, and they made her beautiful. Amar lo Rabbi Ishmael, Bani. Rabbi Ishmael said to him, my son, Mizor nadarta, did you vow about this one? Amar lo, love. He said, no, it wasn't this person I've made a vow about. I guess in those days, you might not have seen some, maybe he'd never, if there was a lot of tzniut in that society, maybe he'd never seen her. Vehitiro Rabbi Ishmael, and Rabbi Ishmael released him from the vow. But Be'otah Sha'a Bacha Rabbi Ishmael ve'amar. In that hour, Rabbi Ishmael wept and said, but not Israel na'ot him. The children of Israel are beautiful. Ela shehaniut menal v'latan. But poverty disfigures them. It's not that they're not intrinsically beautiful, that poverty damages them. Mate, Rabbi Ishmael, Hayubu not Yisrael, Nosot Kinave Omrot, but not Yisrael al Rabbi Ishmael B'chena. And when Rabbi Ishmael died, the daughters of Israel raised a lament, saying, daughters of Israel, weep for Rabbi Ishmael. He must have done this a lot. V'chein hu omer b'Shaul. And thus it also says of Shaul, Now we're going to quote from the first chapter of Shmuel Bet. This is the famous lament that David sung over Shaul after the death of Shaul and Yonatan. And David closes his lament by saying, Benot Yisrael, El Shaul Bechena. The same words. Daughters of Israel, weep over Shaul. Because he clothed you in crimson and finery. Who decked your robes with jewels of gold. That is how the chapter of annulment of vows closes, with the praise of Saul because of what he did for the daughters of Israel. And it's very interesting that Saul is, as a king, is a failure. He's a failure as a weak king. And it is striking. It is striking if you look at the life of Saul that he makes foolish vows. So, for example, I brought you one example on the source sheet. He swears that any man in his army is cursed. He's at war with the Philistines. He swears that any man in his army is cursed if he eats food before nightfall. And in fact, his son Jonathan doesn't hear the curse and does eat. And unwittingly, Saul swears, even if it's through my son Jonathan, he shall be put to death. I mean, luckily, Jonathan gets off because none of the other people will put him to death. But this is not the only example of a sort of a rather foolish oath which Saul swears. He swears he's not going to kill David. And a few verses later, he tries to kill him. I don't think there are any other examples in Tanakh of someone who swears in the name of God and immediately breaks his oath. And he swears. He actually, there's an episode of witchcraft at the end of his life, and he swears, I think, to protect this sorceress. Again, seems just in defiance of the halacha in Nedarim. In other words, in summary, Saul's relationships with oaths seems to be very, very problematic. Very problematic. And we've said already that the rabbis don't like oaths. They're very suspicious of oaths. We get into big trouble by swearing vows. And so perhaps it's not a coincidence that the 9th chapter, which is all about how to annul a vow, closes with a memory of someone whose behavior over vows was foolish and unthinking, and eventually who turned out to be not only strict when he should have been kind, but eventually failed as a king because he was kind when he should have been strict.